Hi everyone! The Sims. I know you've heard of it. You clicked on the video. This series has captured hearts with its charm and creativity, but it's also left players fuming over scandals and controversies, from backlash by conservatives to EA's aggressive microtransaction schemes, misleading marketing tactics, endless DLC cash grabs, and game-breaking bugs. The Sims has seen a lot. Over nearly 25 years and across 4 mainline games and numerous spin-offs, this franchise has been a playground for both joy and frustration. So sit back as we explore the highs and the lows, mostly the lows, and the downright bizarre moments in The Sims history.
First released in the year 2000, The Sims was the baby of industry legend Will Wright. The inspiration for the game came from an unexpected and devastating source, the Oakland firestorm of 1991, which destroyed Wright's home. Brutal. The process of rebuilding his life, choosing new furniture and rethinking layouts, sparked the idea of turning this experience into a video game. In The Sims, you guide an individual or family of Sims. You don't control them directly, but instead sort of nudge them towards fulfilling their needs, aspirations and desires. Think of yourself as part deity, part babysitter, managing their lives but also watching in bemusement as they choose to wash the dishes in the attic bathroom.
And as Uncle Ben said, with great power comes great responsibility. A responsibility that probably shouldn't be handed to a sociopath, but we'll get to that part later.
On top of all of this, the game features a robust build mode, allowing players to design and furnish homes for their Sims. Whether you're creating a cozy starter home or an elaborate mansion, the build mode has always been a standout feature of the series. Although, judging by my results, I don't think I'll be adding architect to my resume anytime soon.
Take a look.
But who cares if I'm terrible at designing houses? Let's talk about the first installment of the series, The Progenitor, the game that set the standard for everything that followed.
The first installment of the franchise was developed by Maxis under the supervision of Will Wright. To suggest it was a mega hit is like saying Logan and Jake Paul are morally bereft fraudsters. It goes without saying. The game sold a jaw-dropping 11.5 million copies and sparked a revolution in the gaming industry.
The Sims initially struggled to get made, with XX over at EA quite reluctant to continue the project, but they quickly changed their tune when the sales figures started rolling in. Within 2 years of its release, The Sims had become the best-selling game of all time. At the time. Shortly after its release and in the wake of its unexpected success, The Sims faced backlash from conservative circles for including same-sex relationships, making the shocked Pikachu face at the audacity of a life simulation game simulating real life. Whether you like it or not, gay people are real. They exist. Obviously, this will be a recurring theme as the series progresses and continues to become more progressive, mirroring society. And yes, I know I'm normally the type to roll my eyes at overly safe, HR-approved speech or left-leaning current zeitgeist sentiments shoehorned into the games I like, but come on, it's The Sims. They know their audience. Let's call them chaotically creative teenage girls. I know what you're doing to those poor Sims, Jessica. That shit contravenes international law. Which segues nicely into our next little controversy. People doing what people do best. Torturing the things they're given power over. Unsurprisingly, The Sims drew negative attention when players began gleefully exploiting the game's mechanics to torment their virtual subjects. Let's be honest though, we've all done it. Who among us hasn't popped Ctrl-Shift and C and then typed move_objects, only to immediately remove the ladder from the pool? Admit it. You're part of the problem. The first step to redemption is confession. Don't worry though, we'll dive deeper into that particular brand of sociopathy later in the video. That said, the first Sims game wasn't exactly dripping in scandal. Maxis had essentially bottled lightning, creating a revolutionary experience that charmed millions. It's with the later releases though, where things really start to get saucy. The Sims got its first full sequel in 2004, boasting a complete graphical overhaul and going fully 3D, Critics and fans alike praise the game, and it's often regarded as one of the strongest entries in the franchise. But let's not forget, this was published by a little old company called EA, and for those of you who've seen my other video on EA, you'll know that they have a penchant for plucking golden geese.
With The Sims 2, this manifested in a few different ways. Misleading marketing, eye-watering DLC prices, and the seeds of the overly monetized approach we've come to associate with the wider gaming industry today. Let's start with one of the most infamous examples, The Sims 2, Open for Business.
The expansion was touted as a deep, complex business management simulator where you could craft and run various types of establishments. But the reality was simpler mechanics focused more on shop decoration and customer service than actual business strategy. Many players were left disappointed, as the marketing promised a lot more than the gameplay delivered. And this was just the beginning. EA had learned from the first game that expansion packs for The Sims were a goldmine, setting the stage for the avalanche of add-ons that would come to define the series, and at times completely frustrate the fans.
The first Sims title came with 7 additional expansions, which were widely adored by fans. They included additions to the base game experience such as pets and allowing Sims to have more in-depth romantic relationships, as well as increasing the amount of families that could live in the neighborhood. And well, literally tons more shit.
When the sequel launched, fans, perhaps optimistically, assumed that many of the features introduced in the first game's expansions would now be baked into the base game. After all, this was the first full sequel, right? But that's not quite how things panned out. Instead, The Sims 2 largely stripped away these features, leaving them conspicuously absent in the base game. It's hard to see this as anything other than a strategic move, the opportunity to create easy expansion packs to sell back to eager customers. Several mechanics and features introduced in the expansion packs of The Sims 1, such as the ability for a sim to keep pets, weather systems, and nightlife activities, were missing at launch, and these omissions were later reintroduced in The Sims 2 through new expansion packs, such as pets, seasons, and nightlife. All very aptly named. This pattern led many players to believe that the absence of these features in the base game was a deliberate strategy by EA and Maxis to set up additional expansion packs for further sales, especially in the wake of how successful the expansion pack strategy was for the first game. That said, I could argue in defense of Maxis. Game development is complex, and some features may have been excluded due to technical limitations or tight deadlines, rather than intentional profiteering. Whether this was shrewd business or unavoidable logistics, it set the stage for a DLC-heavy model that would continue throughout the series, if anything getting way worse.
In spite of this, The Sims 2 wasn't just a complete rehash of its predecessor. The developers introduced several new features to deepen the simulation experience, one of which was the aspiration system. Designed to simulate a Sim's inner desires and fears, it aimed to add layers of complexity to their lives. While ambitious in design, it wasn't without its controversies. Some players felt it trivialized mental health issues, as it introduced a mix of wants, fears, and aspiration levels that could leave Sims spiraling into silly little slapstick breakdowns if unmet. As well as surreal visitations from the elusive social bunny.
While it was certainly memorable, not everyone appreciated the system's attempt to blend mental well-being mechanics with humour, and it faced a fair share of backlash. And with that said, the pearl clutchers were back, this time complaining that the game allowed players to bypass the mosaic effect and see the Sims in the nude, which was actually sort of true. A cheat code was left in the game, a holdover from the game's development that allowed players to completely remove the mosaic effect, allowing players to see their Sims as God intended. However, despite urban myths to the contrary, the Sims don't actually have detailed genitalia. Imagine a Barbie doll and you're about there with the level of detail. The code was subsequently patched out of the game, albeit not before the moralizers could bleat about the downfall of polite society.
Back to reality though, The Sims 2 was pretty tame compared to some of the chaos that came with the franchise's spin-offs. If The Sims is about creating a utopian sandbox where anything is possible, the spin-offs are more like a sandbox filled with cat shit, littered with questionable design choices, abandoned potential, and cyber brothels. Yeah, we'll get to that.
From microtransaction-laden shit shows to medieval boredom simulators, the spin-offs are, well, they're interesting. Let's start off with The Sims Mobile, a 2000-teens Android iOS game that was, as you might expect for a mobile game from this era, a paywall nightmare. The Sims Mobile was developed for iOS and Android platforms, and it was released in 2018. The game gives you a single household to manage and is, as you'd expect, a stripped-down, light version of the full PC title. As with many similar titles on mobile platforms, the game is offered as free to play, but they are, shall we say, aggressive with their microtransaction strategy. This belligerent financial approach left enjoyers of the franchise somewhat aggrieved, with many of the core aspects of the series locked behind paywalls, such as the majority of the household customization options. In addition, they included frustrating timers to slow progression to a crawl, which could only be bypassed by purchasing the in-game premium currency. The mobile game also ran into scrutiny due to the decision to apply region-specific censorship practices, which involved the outright removal of certain aspects of the game, such as same-sex relationships. This happened in countries like Saudi Arabia, a place that has a, shall we say, patchy relationship with civil rights. This ran counter to the ethos of the franchise. As we discussed before, the first game wasn't afraid to include this feature nearly 20 years before the release of the mobile version. But where there is money to be made, the so-called strict corporate standards of quote-unquote representation tends to be less of a bulwark and more of a chocolate teapot. The Sims Mobile might be a barely disguised cash grab, but at least it didn't turn your device into a digital red light district. Enter The Sims Online, where missing features weren't the only things players discovered. It also saw creative uses of its social mechanics.
The Sims Online was a 2002 MMORPG released in the wake of the outrageous success of the original Sims game. The game was poised to take the world by storm, with many expecting it to break new ground.
It broke new ground!
In the sphere of social gaming, and well, it sort of did, just not in the way the developers had hoped.
One of the game's notable missteps was the abuse of its relationship system. This mechanic allowed players to label others as untrustworthy, a designation that could affect in-game interactions. Some players exploited this system to coerce others into engaging in illicit virtual acts, including sexting in exchange for simoleons, the in-universe currency of The Sims. Players essentially created what can only be described as e-brothels, where the boundaries of a life simulation game were pushed into awkward and dubious territory, raising genuine ethical questions around digital rights. This unintended development not only exposed flaws in the game's mechanics, but also led to significant backlash, tarnishing its reputation and leaving developers scrambling to address the unexpected creative uses of their systems. Fundamentally, the game was just boring. So it shouldn't come as too much of a surprise that players were embarking on masochistic emergent gameplay adventures in cyber debauchery. The lack of activities in The Sims Online was a major point of criticism, with both gamers and reviewers lamenting the absence of many beloved features from the mainline series. Core gameplay elements like aging, life stages, and many simulation aspects that made The Sims a unique and engaging experience were conspicuously missing. This led to a hollow and repetitive experience, with much of the game reduced to basic social interactions and money-grinding activities. Although that's kind of the shtick of MMORPGs, the developer should have done a better job at making it entertaining.
Instead of feeling like a rich online extension of The Sims, the game often felt like a stripped-down shell, which left players grasping for creative ways to make the experience entertaining, often to chaotic or controversial ends, as mentioned earlier.
By 2008, the game's run had come to a close, but not before EA briefly tried to rebrand the title as EA Land, which lasted all of a few weeks. I don't know about you guys, but the idea of EA Land as a concept sounds like the secret 10th circle of hell, reserved for the likes of Joseph Fritzl, Jeffrey Epstein, Ian Watkins, and Barney the Dinosaur.
And speaking of rebrands, in 2011, EA decided to take The Sims where it had never gone before, the Middle Ages. The Sims Medieval is, well, exactly what it sounds like. It's The Sims in a medieval setting. On paper, it was a fresh twist on the franchise's usual formula, and it was initially well received as a spin-off that offered a unique role-playing experience with quests and a storyline.
But that novelty wore off pretty quickly. Fans of the series found themselves disappointed by the glaring omissions of staple features like house building and furnishing. Instead of a creative sandbox, the game felt more restrictive, with a heavy reliance on repetitive quest mechanics. And while it had its charm, the gameplay loop quickly devolved into, well, medieval monotony. If The Sims is about freedom and creativity, The Sims Medieval was more about grinding quests, and let's just say it didn't stand the test of time, as it only received a single expansion pack, almost unheard of for a Sims game, an abrupt end indicating that, for this Sims game at least, the adventure was over. But they still had The Sims 3 to fall back on.
The Sims 3, released in 2009, was widely criticised for launching with a plethora of bugs and technical issues. Many players experienced frequent crashes, save file corruption and performance problems, even on GigaChad high-spec mustard race PCs. These issues marred the gameplay experience and led to frustrations among fans of the series.
The game's open-world design, while revolutionary for the Sims franchise, was a significant contributing factor to the technical instability. The complexity of simulating an entire town in real time stretched system resources and exposed optimization flaws. Critics and fans alike noted that the game's ambitious scope seemed to outpace its technical execution. Subsequent patches and DLCs for The Sims 3 did help to address some of the initial issues with performance and stability, but they didn't entirely resolve the game's reputation as being riddled with technical problems. Even years later, forum posts and community discussions reflect ongoing frustrations with bugs, lag, and crashes, despite players' continued dedication to the game.
Many fans turned to the third-party modding community, which played a pivotal role in stabilising The Sims 3. Mods like the NRAAS suite became almost essential for managing memory leaks or fixing gameplay quirks and improving overall performance. Is this a Bethesda game?
In addition to the shit show of a launch, the game also came under fire for its monetization strategies. The game included an online store which sold various customization items, often with frankly wild price tags. Some furniture sets were priced as high as $15, and the user, Bagel the Dog, on the forum of the website Mod The Sims, priced the entire store content as a ludicrous $1,925.19. I'm pretty sure I could furnish a real house with that. Many players argued that much of this content should have been included in the base game, accusing Maxis and EA of unfair monetization practices. It's like they were running a backwater museum, strategically placing the gift shop at the end of the all-too-brief exhibits. But that's enough of the developer and publisher fuck-ups for the time being. Let's finally talk about how morally unhinged fans of The Sims can be.
One of the most vaunted and proud achievements of the Sims franchise has been its ability to attract a large proportion of female gamers. The game's player base is reportedly over 60% women, which is a proportion that's essentially unheard of in this industry. I think it's only really rivaled by the Animal Crossing franchise. However, hidden with any population large enough exist a few outliers. Outliers who have certain sociopathic tendencies. And that, combined with a game like The Sims, can lead to some rather devious outcomes. The Sims is to girls like an anthill and a magnifying glass is to boys.
There are troves of Reddit threads of users gleefully documenting their sadistic ploys to endanger and torture their Sims. My Sim would seduce the neighborhood husbands, get them to leave their family, woohoo them, paint their portrait and then kick them out. Then I hung the portrait in the long hallway to my Sim's bedroom, so each new victim walked past a gallery of all the previous victims. The old family won't take the cheater back, so they basically end up living alone in a crappy little cracker box, watching both their ex-wife and their former lover enjoying life without them. I once made a legacy family and was intending to have 10 generations of beautiful Sims, but my first Sim's husband had apparently had plastic surgery. Her kid came out with a hook nose. As a punishment for this, I locked the husband in a 1x1 box with half walls and had my Sim entice a new husband right in front of the box. He had 3 days of watching his wife cheat on him and starving to death as a punishment for an ugly nose. I had a sim I'd been working on for hours, and when I got up to go let the dogs out, I accidentally clicked on triple speed instead of pause. I came back like 2 minutes later, and she'd quit her job, got in a huge fight with her boyfriend, and got her dog taken away by animal control for neglect. I was so infuriated, I walled her up in the kitchen and made her cook until she started a fire, and then let her immolate. I could have just quit and started a new game, but I needed the vindication, I guess.
You get the picture. People are pretty awful when given some power. But everyone can talk a good game on the internet. Let's hear from a real person.
So I never experienced like Sims 1 or 2, never played like Roller Coaster Tycoon that a lot of people have in like foundational kind of Sims gaming, that kind of thing. I was straight in at 3, which I personally think is the best of the games. And my experience with it was immediate addiction. So, I mean, it didn't take me very long to start being awful to The Sims. I think within the first 12-hour stint that I played it, I could immediately see the opportunities to be awful and cheat the game almost without using cheat codes. I will say I have pride in that I've never used cheat codes. But yeah, it did not take me long to start both finding and thoroughly enjoying exploiting all of the Sims within the game. In terms of some of the things that I did, it ranged from anywhere from taking advantage of the firstborn of every generation that I started by making them go and live in a basement with just a toilet, a fridge and a shower for their entire lives. They never had any interaction their entire lives. And I would just make them get to the point of painting where every painting was a masterpiece, and that would just fund the entire household and whatever we wanted to do with it. One of my main tactics for getting rich super quick is I would find the richest family in the town, or the 2 richest families in town, the Goths and the Landgrabs, and I would choose one patriarch of that family to go and split up from their wives, their kids, whatever, marry them, move their family out into like the tiny hovel that I'd purchased for the minimum amount on Sims and sold all the furniture in, all the windows, all the doors. They would just have to move in and live there and probably die, and I never really checked back on them. And then I would start a family with that guy, and then I'd move on to the next richest family and do the exact same thing. I was always kind of connected to the 2 richest families, and I had my choice of the 2 biggest houses that I could either like sell all the furniture in one house and then move into the other house that I preferred like the architecture of, for example. And then yeah, I'd start giving birth to a lot of kids to make money with, really. Just give them a different specialism, let them only exclusively do that, not let them develop in any other way. And I would make sure the first Sim I made absolutely hated kids, so she hated looking after all of these kids within the house, and I would like trap her in the nursery, again with just like a toilet and a shower in there, and she would just have to look after all these kids until they were old enough to go off and be farmed for cash, essentially. I'd also make sure that the guy that I would pick from the existing Sims in the town to marry and fall in love was like naturally gravitated towards me, so that when I made him watch me cheat and that kind of thing, obviously A, really upset him, and then B, it was easy to bring him back around again and get back with him. So there was a constant kind of push and pull there that was quite enjoyable. But none of my sadistic stuff was ever, like I was never one for like the physical torture. I never was that interested in like setting them on fire or drowning them in the pool. Sometimes if I wanted to get rid of someone that was like annoying in the family and just wasn't concentrating on what I was telling them to do, I would just build 4 walls around them and let them starve. But that was the only way that I ever really killed them off. And sometimes I would do that just to get the Grim Reaper in to try and sleep with the Grim Reaper as well. That was always a fun one. But it was more the emotional side of the manipulation for me that was enjoyable.
Do you feel any remorse?
No, not at all, because they're not real. They're not real people. Having an outlet is great. It's just a nice, like, it's like releasing the radiator valve a little bit so steam doesn't build up too much. Yeah, they're just not real people, so there's no reason to feel sad about it. I'd never do that I'm not Jeffrey Dahmer, I'd never do that to real people, but it's fun to do it to not real people.
Repeating what's now practically a Sims tradition, The Sims 4 launched missing an alarming number of features that players had come to expect. Among the most glaring absences was swimming pools, a staple since the first game. Where am I supposed to drown my fucking Sims, EA? Even more infuriating was the lack of an open world system, which had been one of The Sims 3's most beloved features. Instead, players were met with segmented neighbourhoods and loading screens galore. A stark downgrade. Worse still, the open world aspect of the game remains missing to this day, with no plans for an official restoration of the feature.
In a surprising misstep for a developer and publisher that frequently touts its commitment to progressiveness and representation, it took nearly a decade for The Sims 4 to properly implement darker skin tones. This oversight drew sharp criticism from fans, particularly players of darker complexions who wanted to authentically create themselves in the game, a cornerstone appeal of the Sims series. For years, players were left with limited and often unrealistic options, forcing many to turn to third-party mods to fill the gap. The lack of representation was seen as emblematic of EA's and Maxis's failure to prioritize inclusivity in a game celebrated for its creative freedom. Something of a double standard, don't you think? This iteration of the game is infamous as the moment EA fully embraced the DLC overload strategy, cranking out a staggering 50 extra add-ons for The Sims 4. At least that's what I counted on the store page. There's probably more. Among them sits the much maligned Journey to Batu pack, a Star Wars themed expansion that's been endlessly dunked on by users on r/The Sims. Players criticised it as a blatant cash grab tie-in that added little of substance to the core game. Many found it disjointed and out of place, feeling more like a marketing ploy for Disney than a meaningful addition to the Sims universe. Because that's what it was. Let's be honest.
The Sims 4 has held the longest lifespan in the franchise without a sequel, with EA hinting there may never be a traditional follow-up. The prevailing theory is that the game will eventually morph into a live service model, with ongoing updates and content releases. While EA frames this as a win for players, citing fairness to those who sunk hundreds, if not thousands of their hard-earned simoleons into The Sims 4, skepticism abounds. Thank you, buddy. You're a good boy.
The concern is that this approach prioritizes cosmetic content and piecemeal upgrades over meaningful core gameplay expansions. I think you can argue that the game's current framework wasn't designed to support the kind of systemic innovation a new sequel could deliver. Instead, it risks stagnating, where EA milks players for incremental DLCs whilst dodging the heavier lift of a true upgraded Sims experience. On paper, it might sound player-friendly. In practice, it feels more like a strategy to do more with less, at least for EA's development costs. As an on-again, off-again Sims player, it's genuinely disappointing to see such a great game series in the clutches of EA. It feels like innovation and creativity are constantly taking a backseat to monetization, with every decision seemingly designed to nickel and dime the player base. The Sims has been a staple of the gaming industry for decades, and watching its potential stagnate under EA stewardship feels, well, a little soul-crushing. I have to admit, I'm starting to feel a bit like the EA guy with this channel. There's just so much material to work with when it comes to their shenanigans, but I promise the next video will be bereft of their disgusting tendrils. Funny enough, this one was inspired by a comment on my previous video about EA, which really got me thinking about how The Sims epitomizes the highs and lows of their approach to gaming. Also, if you think I'm helping to perpetuate the EA cash grab cycle, then think again.
Yarr.
And I didn't talk about Spore as a spin-off title because it's a precious angel and should be protected at all costs. I need Will Wright to make a sequel as soon as possible. But that's all I've got to say about this for now. I hope you enjoyed it, and please check out some of my other videos if you did. Please do the YouTube shuffle and like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And I'd love to hear about the evil and sadistic things you've done to your Sims in the comments. Don't worry, this is a safe space. TTFN.